BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? In this episode, I will be looking at a statement from the Riverside Police Department responding to Jimmy Akin's new Zodiac Killer video and going through a long list of challenge questions. My name is Ned DeHaan and I am your host. I also want to drop a couple of announcements with you guys. The first is that there are 3 new Zodiac Killer videos available on Ray Grant's channel. Ray Grant is the author of Zodiac Killer Solve, and he is discussing the series The Crackpot Files that was written on ZodiacKillerFacts.com. There are loads of videos about the Zodiac Killer on the channel New Hoax 2024, run by Vincent McConnell, and there will be a new episode of the panel discussion show on the French Wrecking Crew, talking all about the Zodiac Killer. I will be one of the panelists, along with Jerome, of course, who runs the French Wrecking Crew, and there will be some other guests over there. And this will be episode 6. Seems like we just started that thing yesterday. But if you want to follow along with a multi-person discussion series on the Zodiac Killer, you can go over to the French Wrecking Crew and like and subscribe, as well as to the 2 other channels that I mentioned, Ray Grant's Zodiac channel, or I guess he talks about several different subjects. He has D.B. Cooper videos as well, Ray Grant's YouTube channel, I should say, and New Hoax 2024, run by Vincent. Like and subscribe to all of those. Those guys make some very interesting content. Now, there's been a lot of discussion recently about the 1967 Bates Had to Die letters, also known as the loose leaf letters. In 1966, Sherry Jo Bates was murdered, and that was on October 30th. Roughly 6 or 7 months later, in the spring of 1967, we had the 3 Bates Had to Die letters. 2 of them say Bates had to die, there will be more, and they were signed with a Z. The third one says she had to die, there will be more, and signed with a Z. And the reason why it says that is because the third one was mailed to Sherry Jo's father. So if it said Bates had to die, there will be more, his name was also Bates, so that wouldn't necessarily work. So that's why it says she had to die, there will be more. Now, in 2021, a press release came out from the Riverside Police Department stating that there was a person who admitted to hoaxing the letters in 2016. And I want to read through this press release because this is something that has been disputed by numerous Zodiac researchers and zodiologists over the last 3 years. Well, what exactly is the press release trying to communicate? Let's have a read. In 1967, the Riverside PD received a handwritten letter in the mail that led investigators to believe the investigation may have been associated with the Zodiac Killer. This letter, along with sensitive information leaked to the media at the time, fueled many theories and speculation regarding the case. In 2016, investigators received an anonymous letter from a person admitting the handwritten letter sent to our department months after Sherry Jo Bates was murdered was written as a sick joke and he was not the Zodiac Killer. Then, in 2020, with the help of the FBI Los Angeles Investigative Genealogy Team, the Homicide Cold Case Unit was able to confirm the origin of the letter and that the person who sent it was a troubled youth who was seeking out attention in his teenage years. Although Sherry Jo Bates' case has been officially ruled out as being part of the Zodiac Killer investigations, the FBI Los Angeles Investigative Genealogy Team and various other law enforcement agencies continue to work with the unsolved murder. Anyone with additional information can send tips to the FBI.gov website. Earlier this year, Homicide Cold Case units were contacted by a private citizen who wished to offer a $50,000 reward leading to the arrest and conviction of the person responsible for the Sherry Jo Bates murder. This reward was only valid until January 31st of 2022. Okay, though, what's that trying to say? What's that trying to say? I mean, I think that no matter how this is worded, I think it becomes quite clear that they're trying to say that they investigated the person, they obtained DNA from the letter that was mailed in 2016. And the reason why it's only referring to one of the Bates Had to Die letters is because it says very clearly that one letter was mailed to the police department. So you have one letter going to the police, one to the media, and one to Mr. Bates, Joseph Bates, Sherry Jo's father. But that's why it's only referring to one handwritten letter. All right, so let's just look at some of the phrasing of the press release that people are trying to dispute. In 2020, with help from the FBI Los Angeles Investigative Genealogy Team, the Homicide Cold Case Unit was able to confirm the origin of the letter and that the person who sent it was a troubled youth who was seeking out attention in his teenage years. I mean, to me, that seems like what they're trying to say is that they've confirmed the origin of the letter. Oh, right. Well, that indicates that he was the person who sent it, and they maybe matched his DNA to something that was found on the letter, or some way, somehow, they've identified him as the letter writer. And it's not just a suspicion if they're using the word confirmed. So as of now, I do believe that the Bates Had to Die letters were written by the prankster, or the hoaxer, as he is sometimes referred to. But I would actually like to move on to the next point here on Zodiac Monday, and I want to respond to Jimmy Akin's Zodiac Killer video. Jimmy Akin is a YouTuber who is planning a 3-part series on the Zodiac Killer, and his first one was very general, talking about a lot of the background facts of the case. In the second one, he really got into the letters and the ciphers, and I was really hooked on this one. If you are a little bit more familiar with the background story and some of the basic info, I think that you would find his second Zodiac Killer video way more engaging. But there are some points, though, that I wanted to discuss and challenge. Firstly, Jimmy Akin was convinced that the Zodiac Killer committed the attempted abduction of Kathleen Johns on March 22nd of 1970, and Kathleen Johns is the woman who's driving down Highway Route 132, and then the Zodiac tries to get her attention, or somebody tries to get her attention, says your back wheel is wobbling, and you know that story. And then, ultimately, the wheel falls off the car, and he gives her a ride. Months later, the Zodiac would claim this and take credit for it in a letter when he is stating that, I gave an interesting ride to a woman and her baby. Then he set her car on fire. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what the Zodiac said, something to that effect. At this point, it had already been reported in the media about this story. Kathleen Johns even saw a poster of the Zodiac on a wall, because in 1970, they already had the composite sketches of the Zodiac Killer, the famous one with the glasses. So she thought that that was the person who had abducted her. Now, why would the Zodiac put this in a letter if he didn't do it? Because there are so many reasons to be skeptical. Why would the Zodiac ever provide details for a crime that he didn't commit? And I have to give a shout out to Mark Hewitt, who is the author of the new book Obsessed, which I'll talk about in a second, who just asked that as a challenge question to a lot of people. If the Zodiac were to take credit for a crime he didn't commit and provide specific information about that crime, well, what if somebody else got arrested for it? What if somebody else got busted for it? Wouldn't he look really, really bad? Wouldn't he just be exposed as a phony? And my simple take on this is, I don't believe the Zodiac Killer abducted Kathleen Johns. I mean, something about that story is wrong, and I've gone into it in a lot of other episodes, but the specific reason is, I think the Zodiac could have learned about it from the papers, and we have about 3 months that have gone by before the Zodiac said anything about it in a letter. So I think that that indicates that maybe the 3-month time gap shows the Zodiac that they're probably not going to catch the person who did it. Now, did the abduction even happen? I don't know, but maybe the Zodiac is thinking, all right, they're not just going to find some guy driving around in the dark. If they haven't arrested him in 3 months, they'll probably never catch him. And nobody has been arrested for the abduction of Kathleen Johns. So if that's what the Zodiac was thinking, then he was probably right. Now, Jimmy Akin's next point from his video is that he was convinced that the Zodiac Killer also committed another unconfirmed crime, and that was the murder of Officer Richard Radetich. And you guys know here on Zodiac Monday, I don't accept any of the unconfirmed events as Zodiac activity. I really think that the Zodiac Killer was just the serial killer who committed the Lake Herman Road murders, the Blue Rock Springs shooting, the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and the murder of Paul Stein. Anything that happened before or after that is not impossible. Like Sherry Jo Bates, for example, it's possible. I'm just not convinced of it. Or the murder of Officer Richard Radetich, that's also possible. And I have to say, this part of the video was way more convincing. And Jimmy Akin was citing a lot of Michael Cole's analysis, Michael Cole, author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy. But what he's talking about is the time frame, the way the Zodiac took credit for this one, and just the entire presentation created by the Zodiac killer indicated more strongly that he was the killer. To provide some background information, I'm going to go over to ZodiacCiphers.com, which is run by Richard Grinnell, and he is sometimes a panelist on Jerome's channel, The French Wrecking Crew, for the panel discussions. And one more time, I invite you guys to go over there and have a look at some of those. But this is called Before and After the Radetich Murder. And on June 19th, 1970, Sergeant Richard Radetich was gunned down by 3 shots from a .38 caliber revolver at point-blank range through the driver's side window of his vehicle. While in the process of serving a parking ticket, he sat in his police car near 643 Waller Street, San Francisco, in the Lower Haight District, when he sustained life-threatening injuries and subsequently died 15 hours later. Local residents heard a vehicle speeding away from the area. Unfortunately, the number of assailants presented at the crime scene is unknown. The parking ticket Richard Radetich had just written was for a 1965 Oldsmobile, bereft of a 1970 license plate tag, albeit Police Chief Alfred J. Nelder said at the time that they had no reason to suspect the owner of this vehicle to be a participant in the commission of the murder. Detectives suspect the killer or killers pulled their vehicles alongside the police cars, and, without exiting their vehicle, they fired through the closed window, shattering the glass and striking Richard Radetich in the head. A short distance from the crime scene, 0.3 miles to be precise, a gas station attendant recalled seeing a white Cadillac racing down Oak Street and entering Divisadero Street. Officer Radetich's murder shocked the local community as he left behind a wife, Nancy, and his 8-month-old daughter, Janine. 7 days later, a letter from the Zodiac killer arrived at the San Francisco Chronicle that suggested that he may have been responsible for it, stating, "I shot a man sitting in a parked car with a .38. But was the killer the murderer, or was it an attempt to lay claim to somebody else's crimes? 2 violent groups were operating in the 1970s that needed little prompting to come forward and admit their crimes. Despite this, however, neither the Black Liberation Army or the Weather Underground ever admitted any involvement in the Richard Radetich murder. So was the Zodiac killer the murderer of Richard Radetich? And I really liked this article from ZodiacCiphers.com because it encapsulated some of the points that Jimmy Akin made in his video, and even though this is written by Richard Grinnell, I can see how they came to some similar conclusions. And firstly, the Zodiac is saying, shot a man sitting in a parked car with a .38. And this letter only comes a week after the shooting. So we have the shooting of Richard Radetich on June 19th. Then on June 26th, there comes the letter. So what Jimmy Akin was saying is that this time frame indicates that someone really could have, had the opportunity to take credit for the crime if he actually did it. And also, there were no other murders in the area where someone was sitting in a parked car and shot with a .38 caliber firearm. Therefore, he thinks that it was the Zodiac killer. Now, interestingly, there are people who would dispute this narrative, and they would say that, the Zodiac was being truthful in his letter, but he might not have been referring to Officer Richard Radetich. For example, one of them would be Jeremy Berthium, author of the book So I See You Don't Paint Houses, and he thinks that the man sitting in a car who was shot with a .38 is a reference to the 1965 murder of Thomas Snow, and that this deals with some mathematical issues like drawing some radians on the map and angles. He believes that the first Zodiac crime that took place was the murder of Thomas Snow. And I invite you guys to check out my interview with Jeremy Berthium here on this channel called Zodiac Killer News Report, Richard Gaikowski edition. And yes, Jeremy's suspect is Richard Gaikowski, among the many who think that Geik was the Zodiac. Now, when I heard Jimmy Akin's presentation, it sounded convincing. And I've read Michael Cole's books before, and I've done several episodes on Michael Cole's Zodiac Revisited trilogy. I've also had the opportunity to interview him multiple times, and I've never really been super convinced about his analysis of the Radetich murder, and part of it was because Michael Cole was saying that, okay, this guy's murdered on June 19th, that's so close to the summer solstice, and he thought that the Zodiac was trying to commit crimes on or around the solstices and the equinoxes, and my skeptical response to all of that was, okay, well, why not just do it? Why not just commit the crime on the summer solstice, June 21st? Maybe it just wasn't opportunistic enough or something. I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking freely at that point. But when we look at the time frame, what is so much more important is this connection from June 19th to June 26th. And I'm going to play a clip for you guys in just a second from Jimmy Akin's YouTube channel, but I think that he was just very, very persuasive and very, very convincing about this point that Richard Radetich may indeed be a real Zodiac killer victim, and he's zoning in on things aside from that part of the summer solstice angle, which I think creates a little bit of confusion. And to be fair, I still have some skeptical reservations. I'm not 100% convinced that Richard Radetich was killed by the Zodiac killer, because I'm also aware that just because somebody sounds extremely passionate and they have convinced themselves that this is what happened, doesn't mean it's what actually happened in the historical sense. So I always have some skeptical doubts, if you will. But I told you guys that I was going to play a clip from Jimmy Akin's channel. This one is going to talk about the Count Marco letters. It will talk about Michael Cole's book, and then there will be some statements about psychology. And it's going to be rather long. It's about 7 minutes long, and I have the timestamps down below if you guys want to follow along with everything, but let's play the clip.
Editor, put Marco back in the hellhole from whence it came. He has a serious psychological disorder, always needing to feel superior. I suggest you refer him to a shrink. Meanwhile, cancel the Count Marco column. Since the Count can write anonymously, so can I. The Red Phantom. Red with rage.
Document experts also agreed that this came from the former Zodiac, and the Chronicle didn't cancel the Count Marco column, but perhaps not so surprisingly, after the postcard, Mark Spinelli decided, I've been writing this column for 15 years, and now that I've attracted the attention of the most famous local serial killer, maybe 15 years is enough, and he stopped writing the column. Now, because Count Marco was writing deliberately outrageous stuff, there are any number of things he wrote that could have caused the former Zodiac to be outraged. But in the postcard, the killer made two references to psychology. First, he said that Marco had a serious psychological disorder of always needing to feel superior, which was true of the way the Count Marco persona wrote. It was also true of the way the Zodiac persona had written. And then secondly, he says, send Count Marco to a shrink. In the third volume of his Zodiac Revisited series, author Michael Cole points out that just 5 days earlier, on July 3rd, Count Marco had written a column in which he rubbished psychiatrists. He said that they ruined more marriages than they saved, that shrinks look at ordinary marriage problems as cases, that they leave their patients totally disoriented, that they can only agree on specific diagnoses about 40% of the time, and he concluded by writing,
the best psychiatric treatment you can have is taking a long, truthful look in the mirror and saying honestly to yourself, okay, what am I doing wrong? Your mirror will tell you. The basic trouble with marriages is too many of you are afraid to face the truth and hope an outsider will agree. You don't need psychiatry. All you need is the Count Marco column.
So you don't need psychiatry, you just need the Count Marco column. And then 5 days later, the former Zodiac writes a letter saying that Marco has the serious psychological disorder of always needing to feel superior. He says to send him to a shrink. And whereas Marco had said all you need is the Count Marco column, the former Zodiac says cancel the Count Marco column. He also signs himself with a new persona, the Red Phantom, explaining that he's red with rage. And this is also probably a reference to a silent movie character. In view of this, I think that Michael Cole's suggestion that it is this column that prompted the killer's postcard is quite plausible. But I'm not at all sold on another suggestion that Cole makes. He writes,
Let's consider this final letter in the larger context of Zodiac-related events. After his communiques in the spring of 1971, the killer dropped out of sight. 3 years later, inspired by The Exorcist, he reemerged to kill off his Zodiac persona. Shortly thereafter, the killer lambasted the movie Badlands for its glorification of violence, and in so doing indirectly expressed some degree of remorse. Finally, in his swan song missive, he vehemently took issue with Count Marco for the writer's disrespect of psychology and the arrogance of the assertion, "All you need is the Count Marco column." One possible scenario that explains all of these details is that the killer sought professional psychiatric help on or around the beginning of his hiatus, which started in spring 1971. Given that the Belli letter appeared to be an aborted but otherwise authentic attempt to seek help, it's not unreasonable to consider that the fugitive may have followed up with one or more additional attempts. Continuing this line of thought, under the care of a psychiatrist, the killer may well have achieved some level of control over his mental disorder, which in turn might explain the cessation of his activities starting in 1971. If the killer did manage to make some progress with his mental disorder through the help of psychiatric treatment, it's easy to imagine that he may have honestly valued the profession of psychiatry. The remorse evident in the citizen card suggests the killer may have made real progress toward understanding the depth of the destruction that his actions had wrought. He likely would have been under the ongoing care of a psychiatrist and may well have considered the relationship essential to his continued state of relative mental well-being. Under these circumstances, one can easily imagine the killer taking offense to Count Marco's whimsical ramblings aimed at devaluing psychiatry.
I think that Cole's 3-volume work on the Zodiac is excellent, far better than much that has been written about him. I don't agree with everything in it, but I recommend it to people who'd like to learn more. But I do disagree here for 2 reasons. First, reporting requirements weren't as strict in the early 1970s as they are today. Today, if a psychiatric professional comes to believe that their patient is a danger to himself or others, they're required to report it to the authorities. That wasn't the case in the early 1970s, but there were court cases about this that were in progress at the time and in the state of California. Because in 1969, a woman named Tatiana Tarasov was killed after a psychologist failed to report that one of his patients was thinking about killing her, which led to the adoption in California and later other states of what is now known as the Tarasov duty. That wasn't yet a legal requirement when Cole proposes that Zodiac went for counseling, but even in the absence of a legal duty, lots of psychological professionals would have reported such a patient if one of their patients confessed to a bunch of murders and was asking for help controlling murderous impulses. Zodiac would have been taking a huge risk by going for counseling, and I think he was too careful to do that, with him being even more unlikely to do so as a newspaper reader himself when the Tarasov case was all over the newspapers in California. And I think if he wasn't specific about the kind of impulses he was seeking to try to get control of, I don't see how the counseling would have helped him. That leads me to the second reason I disagree with Cole on this point, which is that the Zodiac was a high-grade narcissistic psychopath. Killing was a game for him, and he wanted to continue the game by getting attention for it and inflicting fear on a broader populace, as illustrated by his extensive correspondence with the newspapers and all the ciphers and things like that. The sad truth is that for anyone who has that kind of narcissism and psychopathy, there's really no going back. Psychiatric treatment, even today, will not cause a person like that to have genuine remorse for their deeds. So even if Zodiac had sought treatment and had avoided being reported, the treatment wouldn't have brought about a real moral or empathetic renovation in him.
And one more time, those were the words of Jimmy Akin, as well as his co-host there, and that was from episode 2 in their multi-part series on the Zodiac Killer. As far as I know, they've planned 3 episodes on the Zodiac, but sometimes people say that they're going to do, one episode or 3 episodes, and then it turns into a larger series because they find new aspects of the Zodiac Killer mystery that they want to explore. So there's some immediate responses that I have to this video clip here. The first is, in regards to the Count Marco letter, I think that there's a very high chance that it could be authentic, and I've said for a long time here on Zodiac Monday that I think that the letters that were written in 1974 have the highest chance of being authentic, because we have the Exorcist letter that's written in January of that year. And there are 3 following communications. There is the SLA letter, there is the Badlands card, and the Count Marco letter. And I think those 3 letters have the highest chance of being authentic. But Jimmy Akin presented the Count Marco letter as being an authentic communication, and that's not done to everybody's satisfaction. I think that that is widely regarded as an unconfirmed communication. So that's my first challenge right there. But the next point that I want to challenge is something that I think is a little bit hard to describe. At the end of that segment, he was talking about Michael Cole's Zodiac Revisited book, and some comments about psychology, saying a couple things. One, I completely agree with, that did the Zodiac Killer go for counseling and treatment? If he did, no matter what the Zodiac did, he probably wouldn't have been the type that would have confessed his crimes to the psychologist. Oh yeah, by the way, I'm the Zodiac Killer and I'm a serial killer. Even if he thought he could get away with it, even if he thought he wouldn't be arrested for it, I do agree with that the Zodiac would not have taken that risk. Based on everything else that we've learned about the Zodiac Killer, this guy was a very methodical serial killer, and he also seemed to have a certain level of understanding and awareness, especially if some of my possible observations about the Zodiac are correct, that he's thinking, all right, it's been 3 months since the Kathleen Johns incident. I didn't do it, but no one else has been arrested for it. No one will be arrested for it. I can put that in my letter. It's a cold case, and a cold case that has almost no evidence. Bear in mind that in the Kathleen Johns incident, no one was even murdered. Now, that's one point that I agree with. The part that I will disagree with is when he said that the Zodiac Killer was somebody who was a narcissist, perhaps a psychopath, and when somebody gets to that level of narcissism and psychopathy, and they are experiencing this type of mindset, and they go through these actions and that the Zodiac Killer did, that he would not have been capable of experiencing empathy, and no form of counseling or treatment would have helped him. I mean, I think that Jimmy Akin is conflating 2 things at once, and I want to be very clear about this. I am taking a strong stance in saying that I wholeheartedly disagree with that ending part there. And later on in the video, he's going to talk about how he contacted some psychologists and they agree with him. I disagree completely, because what I think he's doing is he's conflating curable with treatable. And I used to regularly listen to the Serial Killer podcast, which is hosted by Thomas Viborg Thune, and he would say that, "Hello, I am your Norwegian host. Always remember that some serial killers are incurable psychopaths." He would insert that into every episode, and he talks that way because he learned English in Scotland, so he had a combination of a Norwegian accent and a Scottish accent, and he asked people not to say that he sounded like Count Chocula, and I was like, wait, Count Chocula is a cereal, I don't even remember what he sounds like, but I digress. Anyway, he would talk about how some serial killers are incurable psychopaths, and through my own readings on psychology, I've learned that yes, indeed, serial killers are frequently incurable psychopaths, and those parts of Jimmy Akin's statement, I don't agree. I mean, I do agree with. I just think he's using the terms in the inappropriate way. Because when I watch interviews with people who are clinical psychopaths, you can find these on YouTube under the channel Psychopathy Is, SBSK, and Jubilee even has an interview with a clinical psychopath. What they all say is that they are incurable. However, they have gone through the process of treatment and they have learned how to adapt to society. And that's what I think is missing from that statement. I do not accept this, that somebody's an incurable psychopath, therefore he could never get over it. And firstly, I've talked about this on Zodiac Monday for a long time, that there are indeed lots of serial killers that have short periods of activity, and a lot of the cases are unsolved, so we don't necessarily know. Maybe they went on to commit more homicides, but there are examples of this, of serial killers who had very small reigns of terror. But the more important takeaway is that even if this person was a clinical psychopath, who was an incurable psychopath, who wasn't capable of experiencing empathy with anybody, it doesn't mean that he was not treatable. It doesn't mean that he couldn't have gone through some type of treatment process, let's say perhaps in a mental institution, maybe even with outpatient care, outpatient therapy, and so on, and he no longer felt the urges, desires, or need to kill again. And then in 1974, he writes The Exorcist letter, which talks about plunging into the billowy wave, and the echo arose from the suicide's grave, Titwillow, Titwillow, Titwillow. And if you watch Jimmy Akin's video, he plays a lot of clips from the Mikado, that the Zodiac is quoting there. It really is interesting how and why the Zodiac would have quoted all of this. But who do you side with? Who do you agree with? Do you agree with his assessment about the Zodiac killer's psychological process, that, okay, this guy was incurable and untreatable, and there's no way that he could have improved his mental state to the point where he would have stopped killing? Or do you agree with the statement that I've made, that incurable and untreatable are two different things? That, all right, maybe, I do believe this. The Zodiac was most likely an incurable sociopath. I'm using the term psychopath, meaning that you're born with it, sociopath, meaning that society and the social surroundings affected you in that way. That's what I mean when I say sociopath. And because I don't think the Zodiac would necessarily have been born with these psychopathic tendencies, I think he would have been affected by his social surroundings growing up, particularly the relationship that he had with his parents. And then, even if he went on to become a sociopathic serial killer, I think that he perhaps could have learned how to control his behavior, because other people learn how to control their behavior, and they do it for all the reasons that I've laid out. So who do you agree with? Which side would you take in that one? Please put your ideas in the comment section down below, and you can always hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And if you like listening to this episode here about the Zodiac Killer, I also invite you to listen to my Wednesday show, which is called Ripper Wednesday, talking all about Jack the Ripper. And Friday, I do an episode about D.B. Cooper called Cooper Friday. So we have a lot about the Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, and D.B. Cooper here on Black Box Online Radio. And tomorrow, on Tuesday, there will be a return of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, coming to you guys live. And you can put anything you want in those live chats and discussions. And if you want to support all of these efforts, you can go through some of the links in the description box. One of them is for buymeacoffee.com. Buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And the first shout out I would like to give is to Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. And Batman66 has also been helping out a lot with the YouTube shorts that come out here Monday through Friday. On those days, I try to release short episodes on YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. My YouTube name is, of course, Black Box Online Radio. I didn't mean to say that, actually. My Facebook name is Ned Dahan. I think you guys know what my YouTube channel is. But I also have an Instagram page, BlackBoxNed88, and BlackBoxNed88 on TikTok as well. And our next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery. River Prawn Pottery is also a regular and consistent supporter. You two guys are absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for everything, especially in the recent years. And we also have one here from Stuart McAdam. Stuart, thank you so much for supporting this channel as well. Stuart McAdam was my guest on BBOR's Cooper Friday segment that came out last week. And to be clear, nobody ever has to donate or contribute anything to be a guest. I invited Stuart to come on the channel to talk about D.B. Cooper, because he had made a lot of observations about the case that he had shared on the Cooper Vortex with Darren Schaefer. And I wanted to follow up with that because I thought Stuart would be a very good guest to talk about with some specific issues. So feel free to check out some of the new D.B. Cooper interviews that are coming out here on Black Box Online Radio. And I would also like to give a shout out to Dennis G. Dennis G has been helping out a lot with the images that you are seeing going by here on the screen, and even Brian M. also made some new images for Black Box Online Radio. Thank you so much to you guys. And there is now a Black Box Online Radio fan page that is available on Instagram, and that is under the name Not Ray Johnson, and there you can see all types of Black Box Online Radio images and artwork. That is a fan page, really nice to have. And lastly, would just like to give a collective shout out to everyone who left super chats on the live streams, not only on my channel, but also there were some that came on Jerome's channel when we were doing the panel discussions. And I was a guest on the French Wrecking Crew last weekend to talk about Jack the Ripper, because we've done several different Zodiac Killer episodes, but because I do the Ripper Wednesday segment, Jerome asked me if I wanted to do a Jack the Ripper episode, and my answer was absolutely yes. I've said for a long time that one of the advantages of this channel, or perhaps one of the actual things that I've done that is of use to people, is I've taken a lot of the true crime theories that people have about cases like the Zodiac Killer and Jack the Ripper, and I've organized them. But what do I mean by that? I don't actually write them down or anything. I just organize them mentally. So when I got the chance to go on Jerome's channel, I could just put it all out there, all in a straight line, going step by step with the Jack the Ripper case. And I'm going to be sharing that Jack the Ripper episode with people over the years if they just kind of ask what I think about stuff. I'm going to redirect them to that. If you're curious about the Ripper case, I invite you to check out the Ripper episode on the French Wrecking Crew. And moving on to the next segment here on Black Box Online Radio, there is a new book out called Obsessed by Mark Hewitt. Mark Hewitt is the author of the Zodiac serial killer trilogy, which I often refer to as the Hunted trilogy here on this channel, but it's actually the Zodiac serial killer trilogy, Hunted, Profiled, and Exposed. And Mark Hewitt's new book, Obsessed, talks about his stories in the true crime world, his experience investigating cases. It is a true crime memoir, and it begins by talking about growing up in Canada, moving to the United States, and he gets very real at some points, talking about experiencing depression, seasonal affective disorder, and I would invite you guys to check this one out. It's available on Amazon now, anywhere you get your books, but I also wanted to pay specific attention to a challenge question that Mark Hewitt asked in his book, or not exactly a challenge question, but it's a story that he's telling where he says that the most influential true crime book on his life was Zodiac by Robert Graysmith. And to a lot of you guys in the audience, that might be something similar that you would say that might be the go-to answer, because Robert Graysmith really did help publicize the Zodiac Killer mystery and popularize the Zodiac Killer mystery. And if it weren't for the 1986 book Zodiac, there might not be a lot of the discussions that we have today. Bear in mind, Robert Graysmith did a lot of unethical things along the way, but I've talked about that in some previous episodes. And I wanted to take Mark Hewitt's statement and rephrase that into a challenge question. What true crime book has had the biggest impact on you? And of course you could say, Zodiac, that's the easy answer, right? No, I wanted to put some thought into this, and I wanted to try and answer this question in a different way. And I landed on Presumed Guilty by Stephen Singular. Yes, you can hold your applause or something like that. It probably sounds so dreadfully boring to some people when they just hear that if they aren't familiar with the book. No, Presumed Guilty by Stephen Singular is about the JonBenet Ramsey case. I've done a multi-part book discussion about it here on Black Box Online Radio. It's called Guilty, the Story of JonBenet Ramsey. And the reason why I said that this had a big impact on me, maybe the biggest impact on me, is because it's at the time that I read it. I had been doing Black Box Online Radio for about 5 years at this point, and I had experienced a lot of true crime cases and a lot of true crime theories, and I had listened to hours of Stephen Singular on the show Porkins Policy Radio, which is hosted by Piers Redman. He was a regular guest talking not only about the JonBenet Ramsey case, but also about the O.J. Simpson case, and I was like, I gotta read this guy's book. I gotta hear his theory about the JonBenet Ramsey case, and then, he also had a very different theory. That was that, more or less, there is this group of people that organized the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. I would invite you to listen to my episodes if you want to hear more. I went into that with an enormous amount of enthusiasm, and the discussion went nowhere. And the reason why I say this has had the biggest impact on me is that I had to realize that some people are full of hot air. And, Stephen Singular has passed away now. I don't mean to say anything ill about the dead, but that book turned out to be a whole bunch of hot air. Sometimes people will build you up and make you think that they have solved some type of true crime mystery. They will make you think that they are giving you a golden goose, when in reality, you're just getting absolutely nothing. So I would like to throw that challenge question to you guys. What is the true crime book that has affected you the most in your life? And I told you that I had lots of challenge questions for you. And giving a shout out to Vincent McConnell over at New Hoax 2024. And he created 12 questions for Thomas Henry Horn that he used in one of his videos. And these are the 12 questions about things that are not found in Thomas Henry Horn's Zodiac Killer book, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer. And, I'm going to be very honest with you guys. I'm only going to go through 7 of these, the first 7 questions. But I think Vincent knows that I can't resist challenge questions. I am not Thomas Henry Horn. I did not write the book, The Myth of the Zodiac Killer. But I want to try and answer some of these, because the myth of the Zodiac Killer is also called the Zodiac Killer Hoax theory. And that is that the murders that were committed in 1968 and 69 by the Zodiac may not have even been committed by a single killer. They could have been unconnected murders, and somebody wrote letters taking credit for crimes that he didn't commit. Now, I've even stated that I thought the Zodiac was taking credit for the Kathleen Johns incident. She wasn't murdered, But I just wanted to follow up with this because, I've read Thomas Horn's book, and there are certain things that he has left out about it, about the discussion. And he does the show, the Stones Unturned podcast, where he states that everything you want to know about the Zodiac Killer mystery is found in his book. And Vincent has made a list of challenge questions here about things that are not found in the myth of the Zodiac Killer. So let's see if I can answer some of these questions. And Vincent, by the way, you actually got me to take notes for once. I normally don't take notes for anything, and I just sort of start talking freely. It's a terrible habit, but for this time I have actually written things down. Question number 1 about the Zodiac Hoax theory. What exact tools were used to create the Zodiac letters and ciphers? Well, Thomas Horn would say that it was done with cartoonist equipment. For a long time, he accused Robert Graysmith of being responsible for the creation of these ciphers, and he thought that Robert Graysmith was an active participant in this whole thing, and that's one of the reasons why Graysmith misrepresents his job at the San Francisco Chronicle. If you were even to do a Google search on Robert Graysmith, you would probably find that he was a cartoonist at the San Francisco Chronicle, and you watch the 2007 Fincher film, he is portrayed as a cartoonist. But what Thomas Horn talks about is that Robert Graysmith was also a production assistant at the Chronicle, so he would have been familiar with all types of cameras, all types of design tactics, and also about how the media would respond to the letters and the ciphers. So this would be about using Robert Graysmith's cartoonist equipment would have been used to create the ciphers. Now, the creation of the letters, that could have been done the same way, or the letters could have been written by Harold K. Snook, but at the same time, I don't think Thomas Horn has ever stated that Hal Snook would have used a light table to write the letters. Hal Snook is his suspect for writing the letters, and he said Graysmith wrote the ciphers. Question 2. Are there any existing Zodiac Killer artifacts, such as the killer's hood or Paul Stine's wallet? Well, I'm sure they exist somewhere, unless everything has been incinerated or destroyed, but would they be in the possession of the Zodiac? I could say, based on Horn's theory, they would not, because this would be all about trying to destroy all the evidence, because they want to make it look like there is a single serial killer. Now, question 3. What firearm was used to kill Paul Stine? I believe a 9mm, although it is reported in a lot of sources that it was a .38, but I believe it was a 9mm. Question 4. Who put the bombs under Arthur Lee Allen's house? Now, I think that the answer to this one is Arthur Lee Allen, that Arthur Lee Allen did that, and he had the bombs under his house. And would somebody like Hal Snook or Robert Graysmith have known that Arthur Lee Allen would have been the type of person to be in the possession of pipe bombs? We have to bear in mind that that was years after the Zodiac Killer was writing the letters that Arthur Lee Allen was found with bombs in his house. I think that he put them there himself, and I'm not even speaking on Horn's behalf for that one. I think that Lee Allen put the bombs in his house on his own. Is it a coincidence that the Zodiac Killer also had them? It could be, or it could also be that somebody knew a little bit of information about him and they wrote that as a frame-up. Question 5. Why did the letter writer not use archival ink? And this is a two-part question. Why did this egomaniacal lunatic not use archival ink? The Zodiac would use a water-soluble ink that would degrade and decay. Okay, now this is one that has been addressed by Thomas Horn on his show The Stones Unturned, because the Zodiac didn't care about the letters. The Zodiac cared much more about the ciphers, which have been reasonably well preserved, because in Vincent's video he's talking about how why would somebody like the Zodiac Killer write these letters in ink that is not going to be well preserved or is not going to stay at its peak value as long? It's going to degrade much more easily with this type of water-soluble ink. I hope I'm using the term right. I know nothing about ink, but I do know that Thomas Horn has stated that the Zodiac Killer didn't care about these letters. If his theory is true that Hal Snook wrote the letters, Hal Snook was somebody who was trying to get certain messages printed in the paper. And these would not have been the letters. It would have been the ciphers. And specifically, the 340 cipher and the 408 cipher, irrespectively. The 408 cipher came first, and also there was one specific portion of a letter that the Zodiac wanted printed in the paper that says, two cops pulled a goof from a cab. I always mistake that. It's 2 cops pulled a goof. And no, they didn't. I don't think the Zodiac actually used the phraseology from a cab, but 2 cops pulled a goof. That section is highlighted in a Zodiac letter saying, must print in paper. And of course, the Zodiac would go on later on to say you have to print certain things in the paper, such as the Exorcist letter. P.S. If I don't see this in your paper, I'll do something nasty, which you know I'm capable of. But the Zodiac really doesn't request a lot of his letters to be printed, and he also really just wants to get his ciphers in the paper, and Thomas Horn thinks that there's some type of reason for that, that maybe somebody was trying to send messages in some type of CIA operation that was going on, like a CIA operative working with CIA informants. Did that really happen? I don't know, but that is what I think the hoax theory response to these challenge questions would be. Question 6. Why have none of the conspirators talked? Well, because they don't want to be implicated in the hoaxing of the Zodiac Killer. Why have none of the conspirators talked? I think that just simply comes down to they don't want their reputations destroyed. They wouldn't want their families affected. Because if somebody were the Zodiac Killer and they made a deathbed confession, how many people would be affected? Only that person and their immediate family, of course, but who would the spotlight come on? That person. And they would have their opportunity to show, yeah, I was a Zodiac Killer and I fooled you all. Whereas if somebody is an active participant in the hoaxing of the Zodiac Killer mystery, then they're more or less just kind of going to be embarrassing themselves and a bunch of other people. Okay, I didn't actually fool you all. It was all fake. There was no real Zodiac Killer. There was just somebody writing letters, taking credit for murders that he didn't commit. And also, I helped make the phone calls and so on. So I think that people would more or less use that as an opportunity to get out of being viewed as an ignorant prankster and just some type of a puny little twerp who went along with this hoax plan. There's absolutely no benefit to their reputation at all to come forward as a conspirator. And question 6. Oh, that was question 6. We have question number 7. Did the Zodiac use a firearm with a flashlight rigged to it? Now, I have heard Thomas Horn talk about this on the Stones Unturned podcast. His answer is no. He does not believe that the Zodiac taped a flashlight to the gun barrel and used it at Lake Herman Road. The Zodiac Killer would say that he was able to see the victims at Lake Herman Road, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, because he taped a pencil flashlight to the gun barrel, and that's how he was able to shoot clearly at night. And there was an officer named Les Lundblad who stated that, or I should say Detective Les Lundblad, who stated that the killer would not have needed a flashlight at Lake Herman Road. He would have been able to shoot a victim like Betty Lou Jensen, who was running away from the Zodiac Killer. because her body would have been silhouetted against the night sky, and more or less the Zodiac can see her and he's just shooting at a dark figure. The Zodiac denied this in a letter, saying that he was able to shoot Betty Lou Jensen as she ran away because he had a pencil flashlight taped to the gun barrel. Now, Thomas Horn says that that's not what happened, because that method doesn't actually work. Now, I'll tell you firsthand, it does work, because somebody made just a recreation video, a reenactment video, testing out the flashlight on the gun barrel and shooting at a target, of course, but it does work. What you actually do is you put the flashlight on the gun barrel and you shoot at the center of the light cone. There's going to be a circle in the center of the light cone, and you aim at that and you can shoot clearly. And yes, that's been tested, and it is indeed real. These are just 7 questions about the Zodiac Killer hoax theory. Now, did I answer them well? I think question 2 is extremely difficult. Do the Zodiac Killer artifacts still exist? Only if somebody didn't destroy them, and my more honest answer is I'm not completely sure. But as far as who put the bombs under Arthur Lee Allen's house, I don't think Thomas Horn has ever addressed that, or at least I haven't heard it in any of his episodes. That was my honest take on the subject. I think Arthur Lee Allen did. But what do you think about anything that has been addressed in the Zodiac Killer hoax questions? And I give credit to Vincent. He is challenging something, and he is pointing out the inconsistencies in somebody's theory, or even if they're not inconsistencies, where are the plot holes? Where are the things that don't make sense? What do you want to know more about? And this is one more time available on the channel, New Coax 2024. And last week on Zodiac Monday, I was talking to you about the Soleil Productions graphic novel, Serial Killer Series number 1, but it's about the Zodiac Killer. I'm just going to refer to it as the Soleil Productions graphic novel about the Zodiac. And I talked about the Blue Rock Springs shooting and the Lake Herman Road murders. As I've been going through this one, they had a story of the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and that was pretty much done just step by step. If you watch the Fincher film, it's more or less a direct recreation of that. And I'm not saying that they directly copied the Fincher film, but they've definitely just shared a play-by-play of what happened with Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard when they were stabbed by the Zodiac Killer at Lake Berryessa, the Zodiac's third crime. But I found the part that was so much more interesting to watch and read in this graphic novel was when they're showing the Zodiac Killer planning the Lake Berryessa stabbing. And this is going to sound a little bit weird, but firstly, being weird is not a crime. But they're showing the Zodiac in his room, and he is preparing a kill kit. And I thought that was so odd, because mostly the Zodiac is not a kill kit killer. And the reason why I bring this up is because they were talking about it with the Idaho murders that took place, the Idaho student murders that were allegedly committed by Brian Kohberger, the quadruple homicide, and they believe that that crime was meticulously yet poorly planned, and that he assembled a kill kit to murder a specific victim, and then that got out of control. Ted Bundy would be another example of a kill kit killer, someone who assembles tools and weapons and items that they are going to use to commit a homicide. I absolutely do believe that the Zodiac did this at Lake Berryessa, and they're showing the Zodiac assembling these things, and he just has the different guns that he's going to be using in his murders, and the knife, and the rope, and the hood. And he's talking about how he wants to wear the Lake Berryessa hood because he wants to scare people. He's going to use it to scare them. And this is all about the creation of the image of terror. And this is something that the Zodiac is frequently referred to as a terrorist. The Zodiac was not only a serial killer, he was also a domestic terrorist. He made multiple threats about detonating bombs and killing school children. The Zodiac wants to scare people because of his own narcissistic weaknesses. You can look back to the segment from Jimmy Akin's channel that I was just talking about, and once again, please share your feedback in the comments section. But the other thing that I thought was so interesting, even possibly more interesting than looking at how they chose to portray the Zodiac assembling a kill kit, was the Zodiac was also someone who's just standing in this room where he is surrounded by all the things that the Zodiac would have used. He has his books, he has his comic books, everything is arranged the way that a teenager would. He looked like an adult who is standing in a teenager's bedroom. And it's arranged in a way that he had to have been living by himself at this point, because he firstly just has these guns and knives all laid out or something, and then his comic books are to the left. And this looks like something that somebody wouldn't expect other people to find. That was my interpretation of that. Of course, you could have somebody else, like a co-conspirator, who was in on this. But this is very obviously a serial killer who is assembling a kill kit. But the kill kit would not be necessary for the Zodiac's other crimes, like the Lake Herman Road murders, the Blue Rock Springs shooting, and the Stein murder. In fact, I think that all the Zodiac would have needed for the Stein murder would have been the gun and a knife to cut Paul Stein's bloody shirt, whereas the Blue Rock Springs shooting and the Lake Herman Road murders, all the Zodiac would have needed was a gun and a flashlight. So I think that this is just a very interesting way to portray the Zodiac, looking at him with all of his different firearms, and it's almost as if everything is planned out. This is the next part of the plan. This is like phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And then he's also some guy who's just going to lean back in his chair later on and read the Red Rider comics. But anyway, it's an interesting presentation that was made from Soleil Productions. One more time, their book is called The Serial Killer Series #1, The Zodiac Killer, and you can get this one online as well. And I've also recommended a lot of other sources in this channel. I've talked about other books such as The Zodiac Revisited by Michael Cole, Obsessed by Mark Hewitt, and of course Jimmy Akin's video. Lots of stuff to explore here on YouTube if you're curious about the Zodiac Killer. And anybody can write this show at blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My Facebook name is Ned Dahan, and BlackboxNed88 on TikTok. And anybody can download the audio version of this program for free on Spotify under the names Black Box Podcast or Black Box True Crime. And I will include a link to that as well. And there is always BlackboxNed88 on Instagram. And I will see you over there. Goodbye.